The crimson light of the Cathar throne world's dying sun bled through the chamber's monolithic crystal lattice, casting long, predatory shadows across the obsidian floor. Within this vast, vaulted space, the War Council of the Crimson Empire sat in rigid silence, their carapaces of polished obsidian and veined ruby reflecting the ambient glow with a sanguinary fire. At their head, enthroned upon a dais of cooled magma rock, sat Archon Vorlag, his ancient form a testament to 1,000 cycles of conquest. His mandibles, scarred from countless duels of honor, were still. His multifaceted eyes, usually burning with the cold fire of command, were now focused on the holographic void that shimmered in the center of the chamber. There, 2 fleets hung in a state of perfect, terrible equilibrium. On one side, the jagged, blade-like warships of the Cathar, a legion of crimson-lit predators poised to strike. On the other, the fluid, silver constructs of the Nova Empire, the Lumen, their ships like droplets of captured starlight, elegant and unnervingly precise. Between them lay the prize, the Viridian Maw, a nebula of unimaginable resource and strategic dominance. For generations, this Cold War had simmered, a conflict of honor against logic, of instinct against calculation. But today, the equilibrium was shattered, not by an act of war, but by an intrusion. A third object had appeared, drifting into the precise barycenter of the 2 opposing armadas. It was a singular vessel, and it defied every known principle of starship design held by either empire. It was not a blade of the Cathar, nor a flowing curve of the Lumen. It was a perfect, seamless sphere of absolute black, a hole in the fabric of space that absorbed all light and sensor readings, returning nothing but a void. It had no visible engines, no weapon emplacements, no viewports, no identifying marks. It simply existed, a silent, obsidian teardrop in the heart of a cosmic standoff. "It has not moved in 3 rotations," growled Subarchon Atresh, his voice a low grinding of stone on stone. His younger, more aggressive gaze was fixed on the sphere. "It broadcasts no signal, it reflects no energy. It is an insult, a monument to either supreme arrogance or profound ignorance." Vorlag did not shift his immense weight. His thoughts moved with the slowness of tectonic plates, a stark contrast to the fiery impatience of his subordinate. The creature that had emerged from this silent ship, this human, had been brought before the Lumen matriarch first, a diplomatic slight the Cathar would not soon forget. Now the Lumen were sharing the data, a gesture that was in itself suspicious. The data was sparse, almost useless, a biological scan of a soft, fragile biped. An atmospheric analysis of its vessel's interior, rich in nitrogen and oxygen, a composition more suited to nurturing primitive flora than powering a warship. "The Lumen believe it to be a precursor, a lost elder race," another counselor offered, her tone laced with the skepticism inherent to the Cathar psyche. "They speak of its calmness, its unsettling logic. These are the words of a species that mistakes inaction for intellectual superiority." "They have labeled the vessel a warship," Atresh pressed, gesturing with a sharpened claw toward the hologram. "The human warship. Why, a single vessel, no matter its power, cannot challenge 2 empires, unless its power is of a kind we do not comprehend, or unless it is a catalyst, a trigger designed by the Lumen to force our hand." Vorlag finally stirred, the sound of his armored limbs shifting echoing like a rockslide in the cavernous chamber. "The Lumen do not design triggers, they design equations. They have presented this human as a new variable in their grand calculation. They wish to see how we react. They believe our response will be predictable, that our honor will demand we strike first, revealing our strategies and our rage, which they will then analyze, dissect, and counter with their cold, sterile logic." His multifaceted eyes surveyed the council, each member a predator coiled and ready. The Cathar way was the way of strength. A challenge was met with overwhelming force. An unknown was interrogated with fire. This sphere's silence was a challenge of the highest order. It mocked their power by refusing to acknowledge it. It sat between their fleets like a judgment. "We have hailed it on all frequencies," Atresh said, his frustration palpable. "We have bathed it in every scanning wave we possess. The energy dissipates against its hull as if into infinity. It is a technological dead end, a nullity. We must force it to reveal itself, a demonstration of our resolve." "A warning shot," another counselor agreed. "A lance of pure plasma directed near its hull, not a strike but a statement of intent. It will force a reaction. A shield flare, an evasive maneuver, a return signal, something. Anything is better than this emptiness." Vorlag considered this. The pressure from his war council was immense. The Cathar Empire was built on momentum, on the principle that to hesitate was to invite defeat. Yet something in the cold, silent perfection of that sphere resonated with a primal instinct deeper than honor, older than war. It was the instinct of a creature staring into an abyss that was not empty, but watching. Meanwhile, in a realm of pure light and flowing data, the consciousness of matriarch Alithia of the Nova Empire observed the same scene from a different perspective. Her form, if it could be called that, was a nexus of shimmering energy within the heart of the Lumen capital ship, the Axiom of Dawn. Her council was not a gathering of bodies, but a confluence of minds, their thoughts weaving together in a silent symphony of logic and probability. The holographic representation of the Viridian Maw and the opposing fleets was not a projection of light, but a living model of quantum states and strategic vectors. The Cathar are growing agitated, one mind communicated, a thought stream colored with the cool blue of analytical certainty. Our predictive models indicate a 97.4% probability they will engage in a provocative act within the next cycle. They interpret the human vessel's silence as a vacuum of power, and their nature abhors a vacuum. And the human, Alithia's thought flowed, calm and vast as a nebula. What is the latest analysis of its representative? The data streamed into her consciousness. The human who called herself Captain Eva Rostova had stood in the projection chamber of the Axiom of Dawn with a posture that was neither aggressive nor submissive. Her biological structure was laughably inefficient. A soft, water-based organism with a primitive skeletal system and a startlingly vulnerable external sensor array, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a single mouth. Yet her presence had filled the chamber. Her vital signs had remained utterly stable, even when faced with the overwhelming presence of the Lumen Collective. No fear, no awe, no deception, only a quiet, unnerving stillness. Her neural patterns are complex but coherent, another mind reported. They lack the chaotic spikes of emotion that define the Cathar, yet they also lack the pure, streamlined logic of our own consciousness. There is a recursive depth, a capacity for self-reflection that generates an ethical framework as a primary function. It is inefficient, yet remarkably stable. She claimed her purpose was observation, Alithia mused. A meaningless term in this context. One does not position a vessel of this apparent power in the center of a military standoff for mere observation. The energy required to maintain its state of non-interaction alone is staggering. It is a paradox, a warship that does not declare its intent, a soldier that does not display its weapon. The Lumen were a species that had transcended the chaos of individuality. They saw the universe as a grand, solvable equation. The Cathar were a simple variable, brute force, honor-bound, predictable. But the human was an unknown constant, a symbol that had appeared in the middle of their calculations and rendered them incomplete. It was maddening. The vessel's geometry, a specialist in theoretical physics chimed in. It is a topological impossibility, a 3-dimensional representation of a higher dimensional manifold. The hull is not a physical barrier but a sustained event horizon, a localized curvature of spacetime. It is not that it is absorbing our scans, it is that the space it occupies is fundamentally separate from our own. To fire upon it would be like trying to shoot a shadow by firing at the wall it is cast upon. This was the core of their dilemma. The human ship, which they had tentatively named the Odyssey after a fragment of translated human myth, was not just advanced. It operated on principles they were only beginning to theorize. It was as if a primitive tribe trying to understand bronze had suddenly been confronted with a quantum computer. They lacked the vocabulary, the conceptual framework, to even ask the right questions. The Cathar will not appreciate such subtleties, Alithia concluded. They will fire, and the universe will be watching the result. She paused, her vast consciousness turning inward. What is the human's ultimate goal? To destabilize the region? To ally with one side? To test us? All these possibilities are suboptimal. They do not align with the serene logic of the captain's neural state. There is a missing premise, a truth we are not seeing. The human warship remained silent, a perfect sphere of black hanging between 2 empires on the brink of annihilation. To the Cathar, it was an object of profound dishonor, a silent challenge that must be met with fire. To the Lumen, it was a logical impossibility, a variable that broke the elegant calculus of power they had so carefully constructed. For both, it was a source of rising, unbearable tension. The ship did nothing, and in its nothingness, it was shaking the foundations of their galaxy, forcing 2 ancient enemies to look away from each other and stare into an abyss of utter, terrifying mystery. The silence from the sphere was louder than any declaration of war could ever be. It was the sound of a new rule being written into the game of existence, and neither empire knew if they would survive its application. The decision, when it came, was as inevitable as a star's collapse. On the bridge of the Cathar flagship, the Honor's blade, Subarchon Atresh, stood before Archon Vorlag, his entire being thrumming with the suppressed violence that defined his species. The War Council's verdict had been clear. A demonstration was required. Honor demanded it. Vorlag had finally, reluctantly, consented, his ancient mind weighing the unknown against the certainty of losing the respect of his commanders. A show of force was a language the universe understood. If this silent visitor did not speak it, then it would be taught. Target the void space 100 lengths from its port side, Vorlag commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the deck plates. A single, focused energy lance. Maximum intensity. Let them witness the power of a Cathar star. Let them see what awaits should they fail to acknowledge our sovereignty. Atresh's mandibles clicked in grim satisfaction. The order was given. Deep within the core of the Honor's blade, vast energies were drawn from a captive singularity, channeled through crystalline conduits that glowed with furious crimson light. The forward spine of the warship split open, revealing a focusing emitter that pulsed with contained fury. For a moment, all was still. The Cathar Armada watched, a fleet of silent, jagged predators. The Lumen Armada watched, a collective of cold, analytical minds running final probability assessments. And the sphere, the human warship, did nothing. A torrent of pure, incandescent energy, a spear of sun fire, erupted from the Honor's blade. It crossed the void in an instant, a silent, searing line of annihilation aimed not at the ship but beside it, a gesture of dominance, a warning written in the language of stellar death. It was a beautiful and terrible sight, a testament to the Crimson Empire's might. The lance would have cored a small moon or boiled the atmosphere from a terrestrial world. Then the impossible happened. The energy lance, a fundamental expression of physics, simply vanished. It did not strike a shield, it was not deflected or absorbed. One moment it was a blinding spear of light traveling at causality's edge. The next, halfway to its destination, its path was simply gone. The lance winked out of existence, not in a burst of dissipated energy, but as if it had been edited from the fabric of spacetime. The beam ceased to be. No flare, no radiation, no ripple. Just an abrupt and total cessation. Silence returned. The void was once again empty, save for the two fleets and the maddeningly placid sphere. On the bridge of the Honor's blade, a stunned silence reigned. The weapons technicians checked their instruments, their sharp claws tapping frantically on control surfaces. The data was nonsensical. The energy had been released, its journey tracked, and then its existence had simply terminated mid-flight. There was no reading for its dissipation. The universe had simply forgotten it was ever there. What was that? Atresh stammered, the grinding confidence in his voice replaced by a thread of pure, cold dread. A shield, a teleportation field, did they capture the beam? Vorlag stared at the holographic display, his ancient mind grappling with a concept that threatened the very foundations of his understanding of power. Power was force. Power was the ability to destroy. Power was the application of energy to overcome an obstacle. What he had just witnessed was not power in any sense he recognized. It was not a contest of strength. It was a denial of the contest itself. The human ship hadn't blocked their attack. It had invalidated it. It had decreed that the attack had not occurred, and the universe had obeyed. That was not a shield, Vorlag said, his voice barely a whisper. That was a correction. Within the luminous heart of the axiom of dawn, the collective consciousness of the lumen reeled. There every sensor, every quantum observer had been focused on the event. The data that flooded their minds was not just contradictory. It was heretical to the laws of physics as they understood them. Localized reality failure, one mind broadcasted, a thought tinged with the violet hue of intellectual shock. The human vessel did not project a field. It redefined the spatial coordinates along the beam's trajectory. It created a temporary, localized pocket universe where the energy state of the lance was null. The beam didn't hit a wall. It entered a sentence that was then erased. The energy cost, another mind whispered. The computation required to perform such an act, it would exceed the output of our entire fleet for a full cycle. To do it instantaneously without any detectable energy surge. Matriarch Alithia's consciousness contracted, focusing with an intensity that bordered on pain. For the first time in millennia, she encountered a problem that was not merely complex, but fundamentally unknowable from her current paradigm. They had assumed the humans were a new player in their game. They were wrong. The humans were not playing their game at all. They were the board upon which the game was played. And then the sphere spoke. It did not broadcast on a military channel or a diplomatic frequency. The message arrived simultaneously in the mind of every Cathar and every lumen in the system. It was not a voice, but a pure, conceptual transmission of thought, translated perfectly into their respective modes of understanding. For the Cathar, it was a deep, resonant tone that spoke of ancient stone and unshakable mountains. For the lumen, it was an elegant, crystalline equation that unfolded with perfect, undeniable logic. The message was simple. We are the vessel. The message ended. The sphere remained silent and black, but the meaning of its silence had been irrevocably transformed. It was not the silence of ignorance or arrogance. It was the silence of a guardian, a librarian, a judge. On the Cathar bridge, Subarchon HFY recoiled as if struck. Lies, a trick to paralyze us, a library. The maw is a cauldron of unstable energies and rare particulates. It is a prize for the strong. But Archon Vorlag saw the truth, a terrible and humbling truth that settled into his ancient soul like a shroud. The Cathar had built their empire on the principle of conquering and taking. They saw a star system and saw fuel. They saw a planet and saw a fortress. They saw the Viridian Maw and saw a treasure hoard. They had never once stopped to consider that the universe might contain things that were not meant to be owned, but to be understood. The human's message, combined with the impossible display of power, recontextualized their entire existence. They were not warriors fighting for a grand prize. They were children squabbling in a temple, oblivious to the sacred texts they were trampling underfoot. For the Lumen, the revelation was even more profound. Their entire philosophy was based on the acquisition and synthesis of knowledge. They believed they were the galaxy's preeminent intellects, the ones who truly understood the cosmos. The human message declared them to be not just ignorant, but willfully destructive in their ignorance. They had been preparing to dissect the Viridian Maw, to unravel its secrets for their own edification and use. The humans were telling them they were not scientists in a laboratory, but vandals in an archive of priceless, irreplaceable works. Matriarch Alithia sent a single, direct inquiry to the human vessel, a stream of pure mathematical query. Define library. Define books. What is the nature of the information you claim we are destroying? The reply came almost instantly, not in words this time, but in a flood of raw, unfiltered data. It was not a message. It was an experience. For a fleeting moment, every mind in the Lumen fleet and every warrior on the Cathar bridges was granted a glimpse through the Odyssey's senses. They saw the Viridian Maw not as a cloud of gas and radiation, but as a symphony of creation. They witnessed the birth of exotic life forms in the heart of a protostar, creatures woven from magnetic fields and gravitons, singing in a language of modulated plasma. They saw crystalline structures growing in the nebular dust, storing the history of the Maw's evolution in their atomic lattices, each one a geological record of 1 billion years. They felt the complex quantum entanglements that formed a vast, interconnected neural network across the entire nebula, a slow, deep consciousness the size of a solar system, thinking thoughts that lasted for millennia. It was a vision of a universe far richer, far more complex, and infinitely more sacred than either empire had ever conceived. The Cathar saw a tapestry of life so ancient and powerful it made their concepts of honor and conquest seem like the fleeting tantrums of infants. The Lumen saw a system of information so dense and elegant that their own collected knowledge was but a single, flawed sentence in an infinite encyclopedia. The vision ceased. The void was once again just the void, but it was not the same. The Viridian Maw, once a symbol of conflict, now hung between them as a monument to their own profound, catastrophic ignorance. On the bridge of the Honor's Blade, Subarchon HFY sank to his knees, his warrior's pride shattered. He had been ready to unleash Armageddon upon a living, thinking work of cosmic art. The dishonor of it was a weight he could barely comprehend. Archon Vorlag stood, his ancient frame seeming to straighten to find a new kind of strength not in aggression, but in awe. He looked at the human sphere, and for the first time he did not see an enemy or a mystery. He saw a teacher. He saw a truth. He opened a channel, not to his fleet, but to the axiom of dawn, to the matriarch of the Nova Empire. It was the first time in centuries a Cathar Archon had initiated direct communication with a Lumen leader. Matriarch Alithia, Vorlag's voice rumbled, stripped of its usual guttural threat, filled instead with a heavy, weary gravity. "We have been blind." From the heart of the Lumen flagship, a cool, clear thought stream replied, for the first time tinged not with intellectual superiority, but with a shared, humbling bewilderment. "Indeed, Archon Vorlag, we have been trying to solve the wrong equation." The human warship, the Odyssey, had not fired a single shot. It had not made a single threat. It had simply held up a mirror, and in its reflection, two empires had seen the monstrousness of their own ambition. The shaking of the Crimson and Nova empires had begun, not with a bang, but with a moment of terrible, clarifying silence. The stillness that followed the revelation was more profound than the preceding standoff. The Cathar fleet, built for glorious, kinetic violence, hung motionless, its crimson running light seeming dim and shameful against the newfound sanctity of the Viridian Maw. The Lumen Armada, a perfect embodiment of logical precision, floated in a state of computational shock, their predictive models and strategic simulations rendered utterly obsolete. They had been playing chess on a cosmic scale, only to be informed by a silent observer that the board itself was a living, breathing entity. It was the human, Captain Eva Rostova, who broke the silence. Her voice, this time transmitted through conventional channels, was calm, devoid of triumph or condescension. It was the voice of a being stating an immutable fact. "Archon Vorlag, Matriarch Alithia, we invite you to send a single, unarmed envoy to board the Odyssey. We will share what we can of our mission and our understanding of this region. The choice to learn is yours." The offer was as stunning as the demonstration of power that had preceded it. It was an invitation to dialogue, extended to two empires locked in a generational death struggle. For the Cathar, boarding an unknown vessel was a tremendous risk, a potential trap that went against every warrior instinct. For the Lumen, engaging in direct, physical diplomacy with an unknown entity of such power was an inefficient and unpredictable variable. Yet both knew they had no alternative. To refuse was to choose to remain ignorant, a state that was now more terrifying than any enemy. Archon Vorlag chose to go himself. It was a move that sent shockwaves of disbelief through his own council. The Archon, the living symbol of the Empire's strength, placing himself in the hands of this new, incomprehensible power. But Vorlag understood something his subordinates did not. True strength was not the refusal to bend. It was the wisdom to know when to kneel before a greater truth. He would not show fear by sending a lesser. He would show the strength of his conviction by facing this new reality himself. The Lumen, in their logical fashion, selected a specialized diplomatic drone, a silver ovum designed for first contact, controlled by the blended consciousness of their highest logicians, including the matriarch herself. It was the safest, most efficient method of information gathering. A Cathar shuttle, stark and angular, and a Lumen drone, a gleaming teardrop of light, detached from their respective flagships and moved toward the black sphere. As they approached, a section of the Odyssey's seamless hull did not open like a door but dissolved, revealing a passage of soft, white light. It was not a docking bay. It was an invitation into the vessel's very substance. Vorlag stepped into the light, his massive, armored form feeling clumsy and barbaric in the serene environment. The interior of the Odyssey was as perplexing as its exterior. There were no corridors, no visible technology, only a vast, open space filled with a gentle, ambient luminescence. The air was clean and cool, carrying a faint, unidentifiable scent like rain on ancient stone. The Lumen drone floated silently beside him, its silver shell reflecting the endless white. In the center of the space stood a single human figure, Captain Eva Rostova. In person, she was even more unassuming than her holographic image. She was small, soft, clad in a simple dark blue uniform. Her face was pale, her eyes a deep, contemplative gray. She stood with her hands clasped gently behind her back, her posture one of relaxed attention. There were no guards, no weapons, no displays of power. The sheer, unadorned simplicity of it was more intimidating than any Cathar throne room. "Archon Vorlag, Matriarch Alithia," she said, her voice quiet but clear, acknowledging both the physical Cathar and the consciousness within the drone. "Thank you for coming. I am Captain Rostova." Vorlag found himself at a loss. Cathar diplomacy was a ritual of posturing, of veiled threats and declarations of strength. He did not know the protocol for this. "You have a powerful vessel, Captain," he rumbled, the words feeling inadequate. "The Odyssey is not a warship," Rostova corrected gently. Its primary function is not to exert force, but to preserve knowledge. The capabilities you witnessed are defensive. They are designed to ensure the integrity of our mission and the archives we protect. The Lumen drone pulsed with soft light as the matriarch's synthesized voice emerged from it. Your mission is to archive information. Why here? Why now? Your presence has fundamentally altered the strategic balance of this quadrant. That was not our intention, Rostova replied, her gaze unwavering. Our intention was to prevent an act of irreversible destruction. We are archivists. To us, the burning of a library is a crime of the highest order. The Viridian Maw is one of the oldest and most complex stellar nurseries in this galactic arm. The life and information developing within it are unique. Your war, with its broad-spectrum energy weapons and gravitational disruptions, was tearing it apart at a fundamental level. We intervened only when the damage reached a critical threshold. She gestured, and the white space around them shimmered. Images began to form in the air, not as holograms, but as windows into other times and places. They saw a civilization of silicon-based beings on a tidally locked world, their cities great crystalline spires that chimed with the solar winds. Then they saw those same spires shattered, the planet a scorched rock, the aftermath of a resource war fought with antimatter. Another window opened. A race of aquatic philosophers who communicated through intricate bioluminescent patterns in the oceans of a gas giant. Their collective consciousness had solved questions of cosmic existence that the Lumen had yet to even formulate. Then, the image shifted to show their world's magnetic field collapsing, destabilized by the gravitational weaponry of a conquering empire. Their lights went out one by one, until the ocean was dark and silent. Window after window opened, showing empires rising and falling, species flourishing and then vanishing. They saw wars fought for honor, for resources, for ideology, for fear. The pattern was always the same: arrogance, conflict, and then silence. Our galaxy is old, Rostova said, her voice a soft elegy for the ghosts that surrounded them. We, humanity, are but one of its many children. We were not the first to reach for the stars, and we will not be the last. But we learned a difficult lesson early in our own history. The universe is filled with wonders, but it is tragically empty of second chances. Knowledge once lost can rarely be recovered. Life once extinguished is gone forever. Vorlag watched, his warrior's soul shaken to its core. He was seeing his own empire's reflection in the fate of these long-dead civilizations. The Cathar's glorious history of conquest was, from this perspective, just another chapter in a long, sad story of cosmic waste. Their honor was the justification for their destruction. The Lumen consciousness within the drone was processing the information with a speed that would have overloaded any Cathar mind. You are a race of galactic preservationists. You expend these immense resources merely to observe and protect. It is an illogical allocation of energy. What is your ultimate objective? Survival, Rostova answered simply. Not just for ourselves, but for the idea of life itself. We believe that the universe gains meaning through the consciousness that evolves within it to observe it. Every time a species destroys itself or another, a unique perspective on the universe is lost. The cosmos becomes a little blinder, a little more silent. We are fighting against the silence. That is our war, the only war we choose to fight. Her words hung in the air, a philosophy so profoundly different from their own that it took a long moment to be absorbed. The Cathar lived to prove their strength. The Lumen lived to impose logical order. The humans, it seemed, lived to bear witness. This warship, Vorlag said, finally understanding the alien label they had given the vessel. It is a lie, a name we gave it because we could not comprehend a purpose beyond conflict. All beings define the unknown in their own terms, Rostova said with a flicker of what might have been sympathy. You saw a weapon because you are warriors. The matriarch saw a puzzle because you are thinkers. The truth is often simpler and more profound. The Odyssey is a seed bank. It carries the art, the science, the philosophies, and the genetic codes of 1,000 lost civilizations, including our own. It is our promise to the universe that something will endure. The full weight of what she was saying settled upon them. This single human vessel contained more history, more knowledge, more life than their two empires combined. It was not a ship, it was a sanctuary. Its power was not for conquest, but for protection. Protection from empires like their own. This is a fundamental reevaluation of our core axioms, the matriarch communicated, the light of her drone flickering with complex patterns of thought. Our conflict over the Viridian Maw was based on the premise that its value was finite and acquirable. You propose that its value is intrinsic and must be preserved. This creates a logical imperative to cease hostilities, but it also creates a political vacuum. Our empires are defined by this conflict. Then perhaps it is time for a new definition, Rostova suggested, her calm gaze meeting Vorlag's. You stand on the brink of a choice. You can continue on the path you are on, and one day a ship like this one may come to archive the memory of the Cathar and the Lumen. Or you can choose a different path. You can become partners in preservation. The Viridian Maw does not have to be a battleground. It can be a classroom, a place of shared discovery. She did not command them. She did not threaten. She simply laid out the choice with unassailable clarity. It was a diplomatic maneuver more powerful than any weapon because it did not seek to defeat them but to elevate them. It offered them not surrender but a more honorable victory, a victory over their own limitations. Archon Vorlag looked at the images of the dead empires, then at the serene face of the human captain. He thought of his own people, of their fierce pride and their unyielding honor. For generations, that honor had been measured by their willingness to die for the empire. Perhaps, he thought, true honor lay in the courage to live for something greater. What you ask, he said slowly, the words feeling heavy and strange, would require us to change. The Crimson Empire has not changed its ways in 10,000 cycles. All things that live must change, Rostova replied softly. Only the dead are static. The question is whether you will choose the shape of your future or have it chosen for you by the consequences of your past. The meeting concluded. Archon Vorlag returned to his flagship, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. The Lumen drone returned to the axiom of dawn, its collective consciousness engaged in a deep, frantic recalculation of their entire societal purpose. In the days that followed, a fragile, unprecedented peace settled over the Viridian Maw. The fleets did not withdraw, but they lowered their shields. Tense, formal communications began to flow between the Cathar and the Lumen, brokered by the silent, watching presence of the Odyssey. They spoke not of territory or treaties, but of the humans' revelation. They shared data on the phenomena the humans had shown them, their scientists and warriors alike humbled by the sheer scale of their prior ignorance. The shaking had subsided, replaced by a quiet, trembling dawn. The two empires, enemies for longer than they could remember, were taking the first, hesitant steps toward a new understanding. They were united not by friendship or by force, but by a shared, profound sense of awe and a common, humbling shame. The human warship had conquered them both without firing a shot, simply by showing them a glimpse of the universe through its ancient, weary, and impossibly wise eyes. It was a conquest of the soul, and it was absolute. The truce at first was a fragile, unbreathing thing. The Cathar and Lumen fleets remained poised, their age-old animosity a gravitational force that threatened to pull the nascent peace apart. But the presence of the Odyssey was a constant, a silent anchor in the storm of their history. It made no further demands, offered no more visions. It simply waited, its perfect black form a constant reminder of the choice they had been given. In the grand chamber of the Cathar throne world, now connected via a stable light channel to the core consciousness of the Lumen matriarch, a new kind of council was held. Archon Vorlag sat upon his throne, but his posture was different. It was less the pose of a conqueror and more that of a contemplative elder. The holographic form of matriarch Alithia, a serene, swirling nebula of blue and white light, shimmered before him. For the first time, they were not negotiating lines on a map, but the very meaning of their existence. The humans have offered us a new path, Vorlag began, his voice echoing in the vastness of the chamber, now a space for reflection rather than war planning. But our nature, matriarch, is to conflict. My people are forged in fire and honor. Yours are built on the cold bedrock of logic. How can such disparate philosophies find common ground? The common ground is the data, Alithia's thought voice replied, clear and precise. The evidence presented by the human, Rostova, is irrefutable. Our previous conflict was based on an incomplete data set. We both operated under the false assumption that the Viridian Maw was a prize to be won. The new data reveals it as a system to be studied and preserved. Logic dictates we adapt our strategy to the new information. Your honor, Archon, must also adapt. Is there no honor in becoming the guardians of something so ancient and profound? Vorlag was silent for a long moment, the faceted lenses of his eyes reflecting the matriarch's ethereal form. She had, in her own way, given him the answer he needed. She had framed it in a way that his people could understand. Guardianship, protection. It was a form of strength, a noble purpose. It was not conquest, but it held its own glory. There could be, he admitted, the words a monumental concession. A joint expedition, Our fleet's not as opposing forces but as a protective cordon. Your scientists are warriors to study and to defend. A logical and efficient distribution of labor, Ilithia agreed. A flicker of something akin to approval pulsed through her holographic form. We will draft a preliminary protocol. The Viridian Accord. And so it began. The first hesitant strands of a new alliance were woven in the shadow of the human ship. Cathar and Lumen vessels, for the first time, moved in coordinated patterns, their joint patrols securing the perimeter of the maw against pirates and scavengers who still saw it as a treasure trove. Lumen science vessels, escorted by Cathar destroyers, ventured into the swirling clouds of gas and light, their sensors now recalibrated to listen, to observe, to appreciate rather than to analyze for exploitation. They discovered wonders that validated everything the humans had claimed. They confirmed the existence of the magnetic field lifeforms, the plasma sylphs, and learned to interpret their harmonic emissions as a form of complex mathematics. They found the data crystals, the chronivores, and began the painstaking process of translating the geological history they contained. The great, slow consciousness of the nebula remained elusive, a mystery for a future generation, but its existence was no longer in doubt. The two empires were changing. The Cathar began to speak of a new kind of honor, the honor of preservation. Their young warriors, once eager for glorious battle, now competed for the distinction of serving on the guardian fleet of the Maw. The Lumen, for their part, began to integrate a new variable into their grand equations, the concept of intrinsic value. They learned that not everything in the universe could be quantified, optimized, or controlled, and that some of its greatest truths lay in its most inefficient and beautiful complexities. Captain Rostova and the Odyssey remained, observing the process. She met with Vorlag and Ilithia several more times, not to guide them, but to answer their questions. They learned of humanity's past, of their own near self-destruction in wars of ideology and greed on their home world, Earth. They learned of the great silence that had followed, a period of deep introspection and rebuilding where humanity had turned away from the stars to look inward, to heal itself. When they had returned to the galaxy, it was with a new purpose, embodied by the fleet of archival vessels like the Odyssey. "You did not conquer us with force," Vorlag said to her during one of these meetings, his voice filled with a gruff respect. "You conquered us with a story, the story of our own failure reflected in 1,000 dead stars." "It was not a conquest, Archon," Rostova replied gently. "It was an intervention. We offer the choice. We do not compel it. The fact that you and the matriarch chose this path is a testament to your own species' capacity for growth. You saved yourselves. We only opened the door." The Viridian Accord was finalized. It was a document unlike any other in galactic history, a treaty of shared scientific and protective custody over a region of space. The Crimson Empire and the Nova Empire, lifelong enemies, had become allies. The human warship had shaken them, shattered their old realities, and from the rubble they had built something new, something stronger. They believed the story was over, that the great crisis had been averted and a new golden age was about to begin. They were wrong. The true reason for the Odyssey's presence had not yet been revealed. On the day the accord was to be formally signed, broadcast to the home worlds of both empires, Captain Rostova requested one final meeting. This time she came to them, her projection appearing simultaneously in Vorlag's throne room and Ilithia's data nexus. Her expression was, for the first time, not one of serene calm, but of profound, somber gravity. "Archon Vorlag, Matriarch Ilithia," she began, her voice low and heavy. "We have one final piece of information to share. It is the true context for our mission, the reason the archives exist, the reason we fight so hard to preserve every spark of life and knowledge we can find." A new image appeared between them. It was a map of their galaxy, a beautiful, swirling spiral of stars. Then the perspective pulled back, showing other galaxies, a cluster, then a supercluster. The scale was immense, humbling. "We have been observing more than just your conflict," Rostova continued. "The Odyssey is part of a network of vessels and deep space sensors that spans a significant portion of this supercluster. For centuries, we have been monitoring a phenomenon, a signal." The map changed. A faint, almost imperceptible pattern was overlaid on it. It was a wave, an echo, propagating through intergalactic space. It was ancient and impossibly vast. "The signal is not natural," she explained. "It is artificial in origin, complex and deeply ordered, but it is degrading. The source, we believe, is long dead. It originates from a galaxy on the far edge of the Virgo supercluster, or rather, from where that galaxy used to be. The image zoomed in on the source. There was nothing there. Just a void, a patch of darkness emptier than the space around it, as if the stars had been scooped out of the cosmos. "We do not know what created the signal," Rostova said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But we have translated fragments of its final, desperate message. It is not a greeting. It is not a distress call. It is a warning." The image of the galactic map returned, and a slow, creeping stain of darkness began to spread from the empty galaxy. It was not moving quickly, not on the scale of a single lifetime, but on a cosmological timescale it was advancing like a plague. The message warns of a great silence, not our period of introspection, but something else. A force, a phenomenon, a law of nature, we don't know. It consumes information. It erases complexity. It reduces stars, planets, life, and even the laws of physics to a state of maximum entropy, a quiet, featureless nothingness. It is not a conqueror that seeks to rule. It is an eraser that seeks to make the universe a blank page. Vorlag felt a chill deeper than the cold of space settle into his ancient bones. The Cathar's greatest fear was to be forgotten, to have their honor fade into obscurity. This was a threat of absolute oblivion, a foe against which no blade could be raised. A force that consumes information. Alithia's thought voice was strained, the light of her form dimming. It is the ultimate antithesis of life, the ultimate triumph of chaos over order, the final, irreversible data loss. "This is the real war, the one we have been fighting," Rostova concluded, her gray eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed as old as the stars. "It is not a war we can win with weapons. We cannot stop the silence. We can only outrun it. We build the archives, we gather every piece of knowledge, every work of art, every genetic sequence to create arcs of information. We hope to preserve the story of this universe, so that if there is another universe to come after, or if some other form of life emerges in a far-flung corner of space, they will know that we were here. That consciousness existed, that we looked at the stars and wondered." The full, terrible truth of the human presence was finally laid bare. They were not just librarians. They were refugees fleeing the death of the universe itself. Their calm was not a sign of superiority. It was the practiced composure of those who have stared into the ultimate abyss and chosen not to despair, but to work. Their ethics were not a philosophical luxury. They were a survival strategy, a desperate attempt to stop the squandering of precious light before the all-consuming darkness arrived. The human warship that had shaken their empires had not been a threat at all. It was an offer of salvation, an invitation to join them in a desperate, noble, and perhaps hopeless cause, to shout a single, defiant story into the encroaching, eternal silence. Archon Vorlag looked at the matriarch's form. The matriarch's consciousness focused on the Archon. Their own war, the conflict that had defined their species for millennia, now seemed like a child's forgotten squabble in the face of this cosmic dread. Their new alliance, forged in the crucible of the Viridian Maw, was no longer just a political and scientific endeavor. It was their only hope. "Your fight is now our fight, Captain Rostova," Vorlag said, his voice a vow of stone and iron. "We will add our knowledge to your archive," Alithia affirmed, "and we will help you search for a way to stop it. Logic dictates that even the silence must have a flaw in its equation." Captain Rostova gave a small, sad smile. "Welcome to the war against the dying of the light." The Odyssey still hung in the void, a perfect sphere of black, but it was no longer a mystery. It was a symbol, to the Cathar and the Lumen who had once looked at it with fear and confusion. It was now the image of their new, terrifying, and magnificent purpose. They had been shaken from their petty conflicts and awakened to a universe far grander and more terrible than they had ever imagined. Their journey had just begun.